Buenos días a todos, a todas. Soy Ivan G. Baradi y para hoy tendremos otra presentación sobre el tema del curso Historia Mundial 2. In English, good morning everyone. I am Ivan G. Baradi and for today, we will have another discussion or presentation on the subject course World History 2. O pwede ko rin naman kayong batiin na good day kasi malay ko ba kung ang video na to ay pinapanood nyo ng tanghali, ng hapon, ng gabi, or sabihin nating parbangon. And for today's discussion, we will be dealing on the chapter 19 entitled Colonial America and Revolutionary War. Kung bakit natin pinag-aaralan ang kasaysayan ng Amerika ay napakalaki ang impluensya nito when it comes to the kind of government that they have. And also, we have to know that United States of America is one of the biggest country. Isa sila sa mga pinakamakapangyarihan na bansa alongside with Canada, Italy, France, and other developed countries. And also, when it comes to other fields like literature, arts, sports, and etc., they are always on the forefront. And alam naman natin na ang United States of America ay ang tirahan na mga celebrities, ang mga artists na tinatawag nating Hollywood stars. Hindi lamang sila sikat sa kanilang bansa, kundi pati na rin sa buong mundo. Pero bago tayo dumako sa ating discussion, ay may papanood muna ako sa inyong 2-minute video na patungkol sa ating pag-uusapan ngayong araw na ito.
The U.S. is 50 states strong today, but it began as 13 small colonies. It all started with Virginia, when wealthy London businessmen asked the British king to set up shop in what was known as the New World. 104 British colonists settled at Jamestown, forming the first permanent American colony. Next up, Massachusetts, founded after being established by the Pilgrims, who sailed the Mayflower to Plymouth. 6 years later, New York was pioneered by the Dutch, who called it New Amsterdam. Maryland, which became home to Puritans, Quakers, and Catholics, who didn't always get along, was established in 1634. Maryland was followed by Connecticut, when 100 Puritans left Massachusetts to start a new colony at Hartford. And Rhode Island, which was originally called Red Island by the Dutch. Delaware and New Hampshire, which at various points were part of Maryland and Massachusetts, came next. Virginian colonists established North Carolina 10 years before South Carolina was granted a charter, forming one Carolina colony until 1712. New Jersey was first settled in 1664, though the small future garden state was actually two parts for nearly 40 years. Pennsylvania was granted to William Penn in 1681, in payment for a debt the British king owed Penn's father. That leaves Georgia, which was established as a penal colony for English debtors, and a buffer zone between the British colonies and Florida, which was controlled by the Spanish. Spain held on to Florida until 1821, a full 45 years after the original 13 colonies became the United States of America.
Mula sa video na ating napanood, mahihinuwa natin kung paano nabuo ang kasaysayan ng United States of America. Makikita rin natin sa video kung sino-sino yung mga grupo ng tao na nagsettle at talaga namang naging permanent na sila sa northeastern part of the America. Ano yung kanilang dala-dala, ano yung kanilang personalidad, at saan sila nanggaling. At para magabayan tayo sa ating discussion for today, mayroon tayong chapter outline na binubuo ng tatlo. First, we have the English colonies are founded. Number 2, the colonies object to British policies. And number 3, revolution brings independence. Ngayon, dadako na tayo sa unang chapter outline. The English colonies are founded. So, a little bit background on this chapter. Between 1607 and 1733, settlers from England established 13 colonies on the Atlantic coast of North America. From England, they brought with them of ideas of political freedom that took root and flourished in these colonies. So first, we have the first subtopic. The first colony is established in Virginia. So in 1607, a joint stock company of London merchants financed a settlement of English colonies at Jamestown in what is now Virginia. So itong joint stock company daw ng London in England, they are the one na nag-finance to these Englishmen na mag-settle in the Jamestown colony na tinatawag ngayon na Virginia. Kaya pala familiar yung kantang Virginia, yung Country Road. Sinasabi nilang, Country Road, take me home to the place I belong, West Virginia. So mga ganong peg. So England first settlement in North America nearly failed. So dahil daw sa starvation or disease during the first winter ay madami ang namatay. Tinatalang 104 colonies died because of the starvation. So settlers' relation with the nearby Indians varied during the first decade of Jamestown existence. So Indian farmers taught the English how to grow corn, yams, and tobacco. So dito makikita natin kung ano yung pinaka main products ng mga native Indians na hanggang ngayon ay mayroon pa gaya ng corn and tobacco na makikita natin in places in the Philippines, especially in Isabela. As English settlements grew, the Indians were forced to leave their farms and villages and move farther inland. So dito pumapasok yung tinatawag nating konsepto ng utang na loob na pagkatapos mo silang bihisan, pagkatapos mo silang pakainin, once na naging successful sila sa buhay nila, ay para ka na lamang hula para sa kanila. So ganun yung nangyari sa mga native Indians. They were treated na parang wala na, parang naglaho sila na bula sa mga Englishmen. Yan, this is the Jamestown Colony. Kung mapapansin nyo sa image, yung triangle na yan, dito yung Jamestown Colony. And the outside of Jamestown Colony, dito na nanirahan yung mga native Indians. So, sinasabi na ito daw yung unang tirahan ng mga first settlers in the Virginia. Kung mapapansin natin, it was made from siguro nipa. And makikita natin yung wall nila is made of hard clay siguro. So ayan. So outside the Jamestown Colony, may mga grupo ng tao na naninirahan dito at ang tawag sa kanila ay ang mga Indians. So Powhatan was the leader of the Powhatan Confederacy of American Indians. So ito sa second picture, it is a bronze portrait of Powhatan. Stands on the Pamunkey Indian Reservation in Virginia. The Pamunkey was one of the tribes of the Powhatan Confederacy. And next, the Plymouth colony is started. So after the first colony in Virginia, may two groups of English colonies na nag-arrive in the region that came to be called New England. So ang unang grupo ay ang tinatawag nating Puritans. They separate themselves from the Church of England. Some Puritans form their own separatist church. Kaya nga may tinatawag tayong Puritanism. And this Puritanism was founded by these Puritans. So in 1691, the separatists received permission to settle on land owned by the London Company. So the following year, about 100 people set sail from the Plymouth, England aboard the ship Mayflower. Kaya makikita natin sa picture, ayan yung Mayflower at dito sumakay yung mga second colonies na nag-arrive. And 1/3 of the company were separatists who now called pilgrims. Yan. They also suffered from disease and malnutrition. Siguro they suffered from disease and malnutrition because hindi sila knowledgeable sa klima at geografiya na kanilang tinitirhan. They were seeking a permanent home unlike the Virginia adventure. So this second group of people was not really into uh, not just business. They really want to have a permanent home in this place. Unlike the Virginia na kung saan they only settle because they want to have a marangya na buhay, na magkaroon sila, ma-improve yung kanilang buhay. Siguro napili nila itong lugar na ito para makapaghanap ng resources na kanilang maaring itinda o gamitin sa kanilang business. So another colony, another colony is founded in New England. So the second group of settlers had much in common with the Plymouth colonies. Founder of the Massachusetts Bay Colony also were Puritans who had been persecuted in England. Pag sinabi nating persecuted, they were uh, pinalayas, ganon. In America, Puritans hoped to set up churches that would be more pleasing to God than ones that they left. Because these Puritans, when they were in the England, they were not able to practice the kind of religion that they want to practice. So they set sail and move in the America to practice the kind of religion that they want to practice. So in 1630, more than 1,000 settlers arrived in the Massachusetts Bay. So over the next 12 years, 19,000 more arrived. And itong mga nag-arrive na to, they were better organized, edukado sila, and mas mayaman sila compare sa mga Plymouth colonies. So in 1961, Massachusetts Bay absorbed the Plymouth colony. Yan. Exiles from Massachusetts settle in Rhode Islands. So the leaders of Massachusetts Bay insisted that all people in the colony conform to Puritan ways and belief. Pero in 1635, Puritan leaders banished Williams from Massachusetts and gave him until spring uh, to leave the colony. So early in 1636, William and other discontented settlers moved south, establishing a colony on what is now the state of Rhode Islands. Actually, the old name of Rhode Islands is Rhode Islands. Ngunit because of the Anglicization, naging Rhode Islands ito. And Rhode Islands, ibig sabihin, Red Islands. So the first settlement to separate the authority of church and state and allow its people religious freedom. So in 1637, Anne Hutchinson was brought to trial because she had preached that most of the ministers in the colony taught false doctrines. So settlers established other New England colonies. So the search for good farmland as well as disagreement with the Puritan leaders led more settlers to leave Massachusetts. So hindi lang pala sa religious aspect kung bakit sila lumalayas. They also search for good farmland. And the people in the Connecticut, New Hampshire, and Maine established government laws and charters like those of Massachusetts, thus spreading Puritan influence throughout most of New England. So andun pa rin talaga yung Puritanism na ini-spread nila throughout most of the New England. So Dutch and the Swedish colonies become part of English America. So Dutch and Swedish colonies become part of English America. So in early 17th century, Dutch and Swedish colonies settled in parts of what are now states of New York, New Jersey, and Delaware. So one of Henry Hudson voyages had given Dutch a claim to Hudson River Valley, which they called New Netherland. So settlement was low because the Dutch West India Company was more into trade rather than the colonization. So when an English fleet was sent to New Amsterdam, the Dutch were in no position to defend their colony, or the land south of the Hudson River, which had been settled by Dutch and Swedish colonies, became the English colony of New Jersey. Kaya makikita nyo sa picture, ayan ay yung Dutch ship na kung saan ginamit ng mga other colonies na magsasettle in the America. So a Dutch-built armed merchant ships farm were carrying Swedish settlers to North America in 1638 to establish the colony of New Sweden. So the Pennsylvania colony offers religious freedom. So another group of non-conforming Protestants in England was the Society of Friends, o ang tawag sa kanila, the Society of Friends, whose members were known as Quakers. So makikita nyo sa picture na to, very familiar siya, right? Kung mapapansin nyo, nakikita natin itong imahe na to sa isang pagkain. At kung tama ang naisip nyo, kayo ay tama. Nakikita natin itong tao na to sa logo ng Quakers Oats. But little bit information, yung nakikita natin sa Quaker Oats na logo, it's not actually a person, but it's just a representation of the Quakers. It is not a person actually, and it is not existing. So yan, si William Penn yung nakikita nyo ngayon sa image. So in his colony, he established policies. In his colony, he established policies of religious toleration and politic liberty, as well as giving generous land grants. So napakabait naman pala ni William Penn. Penn's policies attracted settlers not only from England but also from many European countries. So William Penn's city of brotherly love, Philadelphia, became the richest and largest city in the 13 colonies. So ito pala yung pinaka mayaman at pinaka powerful na colonies among the 13 colonies. So Maryland and the Carolinas grow out of royal grants. Like Pennsylvania, Maryland and the Carolina began as proprietary colonies. Maryland was given by Charles I to the family of George Calvert, the first Lord Baltimore in 1633. Hindi Lord Voldemort Lord Baltimore. So Lord Baltimore, a royal advisor, had converted to Roman Catholicism and wanted Maryland to be refuge for Catholics who were persecuted in England. So in 1649, Maryland Colonial Assembly passed the Toleration Act, granting religious freedom to all Christians in the colony. So with this Toleration Act, it grant all the colonies to practice the kind of religion that they want to practice. So in 1663, Charles II granted a land south of Virginia to a group of enterprising noblemen. It was named Carolina, and like Virginia, Carolina prospered by growing tobacco and later rice. So in 1712, the northern and southern part of the colony were placed under separate government. So dito na nahati yung Carolina. And in 1729, both North and South Carolina become royal colonies. So ayan, this is the depiction of a London magazine engraving of Charleston, South Carolina in 1762. Makikita natin sa mga pictures na dumadating yung new colonies na magsasettle in the Carolina. Yan, reformers begin the last English colony. So King George II granted the land between South Carolina and Spanish Florida to a group of English reformers led by James Oglethorpe. So the reformers wanted to start a colony in which people who had been imprisoned for debt in England could make a new beginning. So the first settlers came to Georgia, named after the king, in 1733. So Oglethorpe gave up his charter and Georgia became a royal colony. So this last colony na tinatawag nating Georgia, ito yung naging tirahan ng mga tao na na-imprison because of their utang in the England. So they were given a chance para magbagong buhay muli at makapag-start ng magandang buhay. So the colonies provide economics and politic opportunities. So settlers in the American colonies had the chance to own their own land, an opportunity that could never have been hoped for in Europe. So the average farm in New England and the middle colonies was large by European standards. So south of Delaware Bay were many large plantations that owners grew cash crops that were exported to Europe. So majority of white settlers were not plantation owners, but small farmers who worked their land. Some traditional English liberties, for example, trial by jury and protection from unlawful imprisonment, had been transplanted to America. So each of the colonies in America also had property requirements for voting, but a large percentage of the male colonies were able to fulfill them. So parang in the Greek society lang din na ang may karapatan lamang na bumoto ay ang mga male adult. They are the only one who have the freedom para makapag-vote at makapag-elect ng new leaders. So ayan, makikita natin sa larawan kung paano tinatransport ang isa sa mga products ng colonies, ang tabako. Nakalagay ito sa isang barrel, siguro para maging fresh pa din yung tabako at away from the sunlight. So most blacks in the colonies are slaves. So the first black settlers in the colonies were 20 Africans who arrived in Virginia in 1691. So in 1691, dito na nga nag-umpisa yung pagkakaroon ng black slaves in America. Brought by a Dutch ship and sold as indentured servants. Pag sinabi nating indentured servants, may pinipirmahang kontrata, but then itong mga servants na to, able to they were not able to receive cash grants because yun nga, may pinipirmahan na kontrata lamang. So the servant learned a skill, work on a farm, or help in a household. He or she become free after the term of indenture was complete. So maari naman pala silang itong mga black slaves na to ay maging free after the end of the contract. So the term service for black indentured servants gradually become longer. Black workers were required to give lifelong service and their children were by law the property of the people who owned the parents. So parang dito na pumapasok yung konsepto na pinanganak kang mahirap, mamamatay kang mahirap. Parang ganun. So at the end of 17th century, the enslavement of the blacks become legal in all the colonies. So at dito sa larawan na to, ayan, makikita natin yung 20 Africans na nahuli or nadala ng Dutch ship. The arrival of the first captives of the Jamestown colony in 1619 is often seen as the beginning of slavery in America. But enslaved Africans arrived in North America as early as the 15s. So ayan. Plantation. The black population increases as plantation spreads. So plantation agriculture in southern colonies encouraged the growth of slavery. So by 1715, plantation crops grown for export were important in the economies of the southern colonies. So most of the work was done by the black slaves. So blacks made up the large percentage of the southern colonies population. So dito sa image, makikita natin yung illustration of slaves cutting sugar cane on a southern plantation in the 1800s. Ngayon at tapos na tayo, sa unang chapter. Ngayon dadako naman tayo sa ikalawang chapter. The colonies object to British policies. So a little bit background. The bonds between Britain and its American colonies grew weaker over the time. So an ocean separated the colonies from Britain, and the colonies had developed their own social, political, and economic institutions. So when Parliament enacted laws that the colonies felt interfered with their freedom, the tensions between Britain and the colonies increased and led eventually to revolution. I have the first subtopic, Parliament restrict colonial trade and industry. Pag sinabi nating Parliament, they are the law-making body of the country. So Britain expected the colonies to provide raw materials at low prices and to buy back British manufactured goods due to mercantilist economic policies. So this Britain government, they are expecting na itong mga 13 colonies na to ay makapag-provide sila ng raw materials at maititinda nila ito in a low prices. And dito, after the maipadala sa British, itong mga finished product, itong mga 13 colonies naman, they are going to buy that finished products in high prices naman. So dahil dito nagkaroon ng the Navigation Act of 1660, required colonies to sell products such as tobacco, sugar, and indigo only to England. Ayan. So early 18th century, Parliament prevent colonies from developing industries that would compete with British manufacturers. So nagkaroon ng the Hat Act 1732 na ina-exports of hats made in the colonies was forbidden. So the Iron Act of 1750 removed taxes on Britain imports of iron goods. So yun yung mga batas na nagawa ng mga parliamentary sa mga colonies. So ayan, the Navigation Act prevented the colonies from shipping goods everywhere without first stopping in an English port, resulting in an opportunity to regulate and tax what was being shipped. So the colonies obeyed British laws. Pag sinabi natin evade, avoid in synonyms. So the colonies resented the restrictions and many of them smuggled in goods to avoid paying British taxes. So many harbor along the Atlantic coast made it easy for smuggler boats to evade the British custom officials. So British found out that the colonies officials tended to favor colonies and did not always strictly enforce the law. So ayan, France challenged Britain over colonies. So since 1689, France and Britain had been on opposite sides in series of wars in Europe. So the colonies were rivals for colonies and trade in several parts of the world. So as French settlements expanded, disagreements arose over boundaries, especially in Ohio Valley. So the French and Indian War was the last British-French conflict in the North America. So itong the 7 years of war, ito na yung pinaka-last na war between the French and the Native Americans. So British rule was extended over most of the eastern North America as a result of their victory with French in 1763 in Canada and North America frontier. So colonies and Indian clash on the frontier. So as settlers moved west away from the coastal areas, they took over lands where Indians lived, farmed, and hunted. At dito nga in May 1763, because of the resentments sa galit ng mga Indian kung bakit naman kasi itong mga settlers na 'to, colonies na 'to ay inagaw yung lupa na pagmay-ari nila. Na parang tinatawag nating ancestral domain, na 'wag mong pakialaman yung lupa na 'to dahil ito yung pagmamay-ari namin. So in May 1763, Indians united and raided frontier settlements and captured British ports between the Great Lakes and Ohio River due to their anger to loss of their land under the leadership of Pontiac, an Ottawa leader. So si Pontiac siya yung nag-unified at ang founder na nag-raid ah, sa settlements in these British ports. So Greenville further angered Americans when he issued the Proclamation of 1763, which barred settlements west of the Appalachian Mountains. So he hoped this measure would prevent the colonies and Indians from more clashes and keep colonies firmly under British rule by keeping them nearer the coast. So itong si Greenville ay mas masasabi natin na isa siyang two-faced person because with his proclamation, prevent niya ang mga colonies and Indians na malesen na yung war. Ngunit ang system nito ay itong mga colonies ay under pa rin siya sa British rule, which is itong mga colonies na to ay nagagalit na sila because they feel na yung karapatan nila is naapakan na ng mga British governments. So ganun yung nangyari. So yan, Britain seeks revenue from the colonies. So Greenville decided as the American colonies benefited from the wars, they should pay a large part of the cost. So Parliament took several other steps to increase revenues and help pay the cost of running the colonies. So in 1764, the Sugar Act passed, which lowered the tax on imported molasses in hopes that fewer colonies would snuggle it in to avoid paying the tax. So in 1765, the Quartering Act was passed to reduce the cost of stationing troops in the North America. And in 1765, the Stamp Act passed, which placed a tax on printed matter such as newspapers, pamphlets, playing cards, licenses, and these other legal documents and advertisements. So makikita natin sa picture, yan yung Stamp Act. So ayan, another images again. Yan, the Stamp Act. Makita natin na pumipila yung mga tao para mapatatakan yung kanilang documents. And also, ayan, the Quartering Act and also the Sugar Act. So the colonies protest Greenville's plan. Ayan na. Dito na medyo nagagalit na yung mga colonies. The colonies were outraged by Greenville's program that they believe it violated long-standing rights of British subjects. Taxation without representation. Yan yung mga sinasabi ng mga colonies. They declared was against the principle of English law. So in 1765, delegates from 9 colonies met in New York to discuss the situation. They sent petitions to King and to the parliaments asking for the repeal of the Stamp Act. So the delegates also called on the colonial merchants to stop buying or selling British goods. Ayan na. Group of patriots known as Sons of Daughters of Liberty sprang up throughout colonies to pressure and force some merchants to stop dealing with British goods. So merchants in Britain, yan na nagko-complain na sila kung bakit yung business nila ay bumababa. Yung mga tinitinda nilang products ay wala nang bumibili. Ayan na nagko-complain na yung mga merchants in Britain. So in 1776, the parliament reluctantly repealed the Stamp Act. And finally, na-repealed na ang Stamp Act. Ayan. The Townshend Act increases colonial resentment dahil dito na naman sa ginawang batas ng parliamentary, mas lalong umigting yung galit ng mga colonies na ito. So in 1767, it passed the Townshend Acts which imposed new taxes na naman. So the new taxes raised the prices of many everyday items, particularly paint, glass, paper, and tea. So the colonies claimed that the new laws was another taxation without representation. And merchants and shopkeepers again refused to carry British goods. Ayan. Resentment leads to violence. Ayun na nga, dahil na napuno na ng galit itong mga colonies na to. And ito nga, Bostonian hated seeing British soldiers in their streets and resented being questioned by British sentries. There were fights between soldiers and people of Boston. And in March 1770, a squad of British soldiers fired into a crowd that had been taunting them and pelting them with stick and snowballs. Siguro itong incident na ito ay nangyari during winter. Kasi sabi dito is snowball. So siguro ang ganda makipagbatuhan ng snowballs with these soldiers. So this incident which American patriots called the Boston Massacre. So ang tawag pala sa incident na to ay tinatawag na Boston Massacre, which killed 5 colonies and several more were wounded. So Parliament soon repealed the Townshend Act except for the tax on the tea, and the situation grew calmer. Buti na lang itong Parliament na to ay nirepeal nila yung Townshend Act. And the result is mas naging mas nabawasan yung galit, yung resentment ng mga colonies. Yan. The East India Company had brought a large supply of tea, expand its trade with China. So in 1773, Parliament tried to help the company expansion by granting it special rights to sell tea in America. So itong East India Company ay bumili ng large supply of tea sa China na maaari nilang i-export o maipagbili in the America. So Americans were angered by this competition, while other colonies saw this as another attempt by Parliament to impose tax on them. So disguised as Indians, they climbed aboard the ships and dumped 100 chests filled with tea at Boston Harbor. And ang tawag nga sa ginawa nilang krimen ay ang tinatawag nating Boston Tea Party, viewed as a criminal act by others since the colonies had destroyed valuable property and defied British law. Talaga namang itong mga colonies na to ay talagang matatalino, mautak sila dahil gagawa sila ng paraan ma- ah, para hindi magkaroon ng competition and at para hindi sila ma-impose ulit ng mga new tax na ginagawa ng parliamentary. At ayan, makikita natin sa picture. Boston Tea Party was a political protest that occurred in December 16, 1773. Makikita natin sa picture, ayan, these are the colonies, sub-colonies na nagpanggap na Indians. Talagang sayang-saya sila sa kanilang ginawang krimen. At yung box, na napupuno ng mga tea, yan yung kanilang sinira o tinapon sa dagat. So, Parliament passes the Intolerable Acts. Dahil nga sa kagagawan at kagaguhan na ginawa ng colonies na ito, in 1774, Intolerable Act was passed to punish the Bostonians. Ayan. One law closed the port of Boston to all ships until Massachusetts paid the Indian East Company for the tea. So, ma-open lang ulit yung port in the Boston kung itong mga Massachusetts people na to ay mababayaran nila yung Indian East Company sa kanilang nasira at ginawang krimen na ginawa. So another law put an end to self-government in Massachusetts. That is the Massachusetts Government Act. So a third allowed royal officials charged with certain crimes to be tried in Britain or in another colony to avoid colonial juries. So finally, a new quartering act allowed troops to be housed in home instead of their usual barracks whenever the commanding officer thought it was necessary. So ito talaga yung new quartering act na kung saan ah, hindi na lamang nakastay itong mga troops, mga soldiers ng British ah, sa kanilang troops, kundi kailangan na nilang maglibot-libot siguro para maiwasan muli yung krimen na ginawa ng itong Bostonians na ito. So ayan, did 1777 printed entitled The Able Doctor or America Swallowing the Bitter Draught. So itong mga soldiers na ito, grabe, bumalik sa kanila yung krimen na ginawa nila. Pinapainom sila, they were forced to drink tea. And makikita rin natin na minumolestya nila yung mga Bostonians na babae. So colonies meet in a continental congress. Because of the harshness of the intolerable acts, leaders throughout the colonies decided to meet how they could settle their differences with Britain. So the meeting was called the Continental Congress, held in Philadelphia in 1774. They protested the acts and organized committees to prevent sale of British goods. Ayan. British government refused to give in to the colonies. As tension mounted, men in the colonies began to drill and to collect military supplies. So dito na nga nagkakaroon na ng hidwaan between the colonies and the British governments. At dito nga, masasabi na natin na dito na may nagbabadya talagang war between the colonies and the British. Yan. Dito sa picture na to, this is the first Continental Congress was called to order in September 5, 1774. 55 colonial representatives including patriots like John Adams, yan, Samuel Adams, George Washington, Patrick Henry from 12 colonies met in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania to formulate a plan of action. Kasi they think na yung intolerable act ay masyado ng marahas para sa mga taon ng 13 colonies. So the colonies fight at Lexington, Concord. So dito na nga nagumpisa ang unang war. So the following spring, the disagreement between Britain and the 13 colonies brought violence. So in April 1775, the British from Boston to the nearby towns of Concord and Lexington to the stray troops were sent weapons and gunpowder that militia or citizen soldiers had restored there. So the British soldiers also had ordered to seize two leaders of the colonial resistance, si Samuel Adams and John Hancock. Ito yung dalawang leaders na binabantayan ng mga British soldiers kasi they are the one na nasa una to yan ang binabantayan nila si Samuel Adams and John Hancock because they think na ito yung leaders na nangunguna sa pag-start ng kanilang war between the Britain. So although the colonies could not stop the soldiers from destroying their store of weapons, they took cover behind trees and stone walls to attack the British troops returning to Boston. And in all, about 350 people were killed or wounded colonies. So the colonies fight at Lexington and Concord. Second slide pa rin ito. The fighting at Lexington and Concord was a turning point in the relationship between Britain and the colonies. When the Second Continental Congress met in Philadelphia, its members knew that there would be further trouble with Britain. So they created an army named George Washington, a Virginia planter, as its commander and assumed some of the responsibilities of a central government for the colony. So makikita natin dyan sa picture, yan si George Washington. In England naman, si King George III was enraged by the colonies' actions. So nagalit siya sa ginagawang actions sa mga colonies na ito. He ignored petitions sent by the Continental Congress. He also approved the ending of all trade with the colonies and sent more troops to America to crush the rebellion. Yan na. The colonies moved toward independence. So in the spring of 1775, few Americans, angry as they were, favored a separation from Britain. So Thomas Paine called upon Americans to give up their agreeable dream of reconciliation and declare their independence from Britain. Common sense was widely read in every colony and public opinion veered sharply toward independence. Parang no limit ang here lang ang peg. Kasi itong common sense na ito na it is a 47-page pamphlet written by Thomas Paine na kung saan ina-advocate nito ang independence from Great Britain people in the 13 colonies na kung saan ito yung magsisilbing uh, wake-up call sa mga colonies na ipaglaban yung kanilang karapatan. So parang sulat lamang ni Rizal. Ganon. So the colonies moved towards independence pa rin. So during the spring and summer of 1776, the colonies moved to break their ties with Britain. Ayan na nga. First, the Congress broke economic ties by declaring American ports to open to all ships except those of Britain. Next, it appointed a committee to prepare a document that would explain Americans' reasons kung bakit gusto nilang i-separate na sila from the government and from the leadership of Britain. So on July 4, 1776, the Second Continental Congress adopted the Declaration of Independence, written largely by Thomas Jefferson, a Virginia planter. So this reflected John Locke's theory of natural rights, which had been so influential on the ideas of enlightenment. So this declaration stated that the people have the right to abolish a government that does not support their interests and to establish a new one. So yung Declaration of Independence na sinulat ni Thomas Jefferson was largely influenced sa theory ng natural rights by John Locke. So in signing the declaration, members of the Second Continental Congress formally made a break with Britain, proclaiming that these united colonies are and of right of to be free and independent states. At dito na nga nabuo ang pangalang United States of America. Sa United is galing sa pagkakaisa, yung pagkakaroon ng unity ng 13 colonies na ito na to separate themselves from the leadership and the government of Britain. And the states are the 13 colonies itself. Kaya tinawag na United States of America. Ayan. Ito, the Second Continental Congress was a late 18th century meeting of delegates from the 13 colonies that united in the support of the American Revolutionary War. So the Congress created a new country, its first name, the United Colonies, and in 1776 were named the United States of America. At andito na nga tayo sa pinakahuling chapter outline. Revolution brings independence. So a little bit background. The Americans had declared their independence but still had to win with it. They began the revolution with forces that were poorly trained, badly supplied, and few in number compared with British troops. So ayan naman yung kahinaan ng Americans. They had capable leaders, however, and were strengthened by their dedication to the cause of liberty. The Americans emerged victorious from the Revolutionary War and adopted a plan of government that became a model for other nations. So ayan, the colonies' loyalties are divided. So not all Americans colonies wanted independence as much as the leaders who signed the Declaration of Independence. So meron paling 20% ng population remained loyal to the king. And some of these loyalists emigrated to Canada or worked with the British Army in America. So about third of colonies called patriots actively supported the movement for interdependence. So these people were numerous and enthusiastic enough to gain control of the government in all colonies, which now emerged called states. So leaders of the revolution decided to form a continental army. Ayan, because the Continental Congress had no power to levy taxes, it's asked the new states to contribute the money and supplies na kakailanganin nila sa kanilang war with Britain. So the Congress turned to printing paper money as its major source of income but with disastrous results. So ganito yung nangyari sa isang country sa Africa na kung saan they produce a lot of cash. And ang naging epekto nito ay nagkaroon ng pagtaas ng presyo ng bilihin dahil wala na ngang gumagawa ng mga products. Kasi sino ba namang tao ang magpo-produce pa ng products kung madami ka naman ng pera, di ba? So ayan nga yung nangyari sa yan ang nangyari ah, na ginawa ng Congress, nagkaroon ng disastrous results dahil sa pag-produce nila ng madaming pera. So as a result of financial problem, the Continental Army seldom had adequate supplies to feed, clothe, and equip its troops. So by 1781, a pair of shoes cost $100. A barrel of flour is $1,575. So, gaya nga ng sinabi ko, ganyan yung nangyari. Ganyan yung mas naging mahal yung presyo ng bilihin sa Africa noon. Kumbaga, ang sako ng bigas, sabihin natin, nasa 1 million. So, ganun yung nangyari. So, Commander General Washington was forced to rely on state militaries. So, the militiamen were willing to fight only within their states. Yun naman yung disadvantage. They were only willing to fight within states but not within the whole America itself. So ayan, nakita sa picture an illustration of 4 continental soldiers depicting the different uniforms and weapons. These soldiers na to ay galing sa iba't ibang colonies. Kaya mapapansin nyo, iba't iba yung kanilang damit and also yung kanilang armas na gamit. So the Continental Army faces financial problems. So despite these problems, the colonial forces had certain advantage over the British. First, Washington was a leader who inspired great loyalty. So second, the patriot soldiers were fighting on their own territory and so could use their knowledge on the land in planning and fighting battles. So finally, many American soldiers were deeply committed to winning independence from British rule na kahit kulang sila sa mga supplies, weapons, kung andun yung dedication nila, yung katatagan nila na makuha yung kanilang independence with the British rule, ay walang makakapagtibag sa kanila. So the British faced disadvantage pa rin. Ayan. The Americans were not alone in having serious military problems. Also, the British faced disadvantage. They face disadvantage in supply problems. For 3,000 miles lay between the troops and the source of their supplies. Although the British forces were more numerous, mas madami daw sila, and better trained in traditional warfare than the continental America, they were unaccustomed to strike and run fighting style of the American sharpshooters, and they were often surprised by American tactics. Kasi nga, yun na nga, mas naging knowledgeable na itong mga Americans na ito kung paano nila mauutakan itong mga British forces na to. So the British government frequently appointed new commanders for troops in America, making a consistent strategy difficult. And dito nga, masasabi rin natin na geography plays an important role in war. Gaya na lamang ng Vietnam, during uh, the attack in the Pearl Harbor, these Americans ay nagpunta sila sa Philippines, and they are also planning to go into Vietnam, but hindi natuloy kasi hindi nila alam yung geography ng Vietnam. At alam naman natin na ang Vietnam ay sabihin nating highland country, madaming bundok dito, matataas na lupa. And moreover, Britain was not fully committed to war. So, yun din, yung naging disadvantage ng British. Most of the Britain forces was not fully committed to war. Many members of the parliament thought that the India and other British colonies were important than the American lands. Yun naman pala, itong mga members of parliament, mas importante sa kanila ah, yung pagkakaroon pa rin ng trade rather than pagkakaroon ng war. Yan. Victory at Saratoga is the turning point of the war. So ito na yung climax ng war between Americans and the British. So in March 1776, the colonial forces finally drove the British out of Boston. Pinalayas na nila itong mga British na naninirahan sa Boston. In September, they succeeded in capturing New York City. So in the fall of 1777, the turning point of the war came near Saratoga, New York. So there an American general, Horatio Gates, surrounded a British force of nearly 5,000 men commanded by General Sir John Burgoyne. Unable to obtain relief or supplies, Burgoyne was forced to surrender. At dito sa image na to, makikita natin na on this date, in 1777, British General John Burgoyne surrendered his army to American General Horatio Gates, making a turning point in the American Revolutionary War. Si John Burgoyne, yan yung naka-white yung damit niya. So victory at Saratoga is the turning point of the war pa rin. So the American victory impressed Britain, enemy in Europe. So do you have any idea kung sino o anong country yung na-impress ng American? If you are thinking right, then you are right. It was the France. So Benjamin Franklin had been in Paris negotiating for French help since the outbreak of the war. So in 1778, France decided to aid the Americans in their struggles against Britain. Later, Spain and Netherlands also backed the American cause. So ito yung mga countries na tumulong sa Americans with their struggle with Britain. The foreign helps provided much needed weapons, money, and troops. A number of experienced European military men volunteered their services in training and leading American soldiers. So a French noble, the Marquis de Lafayette, closely assisted Washington. So ayan, si Benjamin Franklin was the only founding father to sign the Declaration of Independence, the Treaty of Alliance, the Treaty of Paris, and the Constitution. He was always there for his country and helped America take her place as a sovereign nation in the world stage. Without Benjamin Franklin, hindi makakamit ng Americans yung fully independence nila with Britain. Kaya napakahalaga ni Benjamin Franklin in the history of the United States. Ayan. The British surrender at the Yorktown. Despite foreign aid, the Americans were unable to win a decisive victory until 1781. So Lord Cornwallis, commander of the British Army, abandoned his campaign to subdue the southern colonies. So he moved 7,000 troops into Yorktown, Virginia, on a peninsula in a Chesapeake Bay, and began to fortify it. However, that move was a serious mistake because a French fleet blocked the mouth of the bay and prevented help from reaching Cornwallis Sea. So Washington troops and large French force surrounded Cornwallis, who surrendered in October 1781. For all practical purposes, the war is over. Yan. On October 19, General Cornwallis surrounded 17,087 officer and men, 900 seamen, 144 cannons, 15 galleys, a frigate, and 30 transport ships. At dito na nga nag-end ang war between Americans and British. American defeat the British at Yorktown. Yan. The Treaty of Paris ends the war. Peace negotiations among the United States, Britain, France, the Netherlands, and Spain took almost 2 years. So the Treaty of Paris, signed in September 1783, officially ended the war. So by the treaty, Britain recognized the independence of its former colonies. So the territory of the USA stretched from the Atlantic Ocean to the Mississippi River and from the Great Lakes to Spanish Florida, which had returned to Spain in a separate treaty. Ayan, sa image na to, September 3, 1783, 8 years after the start of the American Revolutionary War that led to American independence from Great Britain. So the two countries signed the Treaty of Paris, ending the war between them. This is I think this is Benjamin Franklin, representative of American, and this is also the representative of the British. So the new states organized their government. So the 13 states had to decide what form of government they would adopt. So all the states choose Republican form of government and all adopted written constitutions or plans of government. So many of the state constitution included Bill of Rights, na kung saan dito sa Bill of Rights na to, naka-list down lahat dito yung mga rights ng every citizen of a country to protect themselves from the public officials and also private individuals. So the planners of the state constitution limited the power of the government official. Greatest power were given to the lower houses of the assemblies or legislatures who's directly elected by the voters. Pag sinabi nating legislatures, they are making the law. So in most states, the governors were elected by the member of the assembly. So ayan, the new states organized their governments. So the new states were not democratic in a modern sense. They extended voting rights to more free white males. Pero women could not vote, nor could black slaves or American Indians, either male or female. So only free white males ang may kakayahan lamang na ah, makapag-exercise ng kanilang vote, ng kanilang rights, especially in voting. So the idea of religious freedom influenced the states. So ito na nga, the Virginia Statute of Religious Liberty was the first state law to ensure the freedom of religion. So itong Virginia Statute of Religious Liberty, ito yung kauna-unahang state law na ini-ensure na colonies in the states have the rights to practice the kind of religion that they want to practice without any disturbance from other other people na walang nangyayaalam, gano'n. So it allowed citizens to follow the religion of their choice and declare that people beliefs would not affect their rights. So it also declared that no Virginian could be compelled to attend or support any church. Ay, oh. Sige. So it also declared that no Virginian could be compelled to attend or support any church. Ayan. Sa statue na to, here was buried Thomas Jefferson, author of the Declaration of the American Independence, of the Statue of Virginia for Religious Freedom, and the father of the University of Virginia. So dito nakalibing si Thomas Jefferson. A weak central government is established under the Articles of Confederation. To bring states together, the Second Continental Congress submitted a plan of union for their approval in 1997. This plan called for a league of friendship among the states. So the Article of Confederation set up a Congress in which states had one vote. So its duties were conduct foreign relations, settle disputes between states, and rule in certain matters of common concern. So the Congress, however, could not impose taxes to raise money, nor did it have any way to enforce its decisions. So the weakness caused problems for the new nation, but many Americans feared that the power of a strong central government would have. Ayan. The United States faced problems with Europe. So the weak government encountered severe difficulties in its dealings with other nations, both in North America and abroad. So the British claimed that the Americans had already broken the treaty since some states had passed laws delaying the payment of debts owed to British subjects. So Congress advised the states that these laws violated the peace treaty, but it had not power to take action to change state laws. So the new nation also was in a serious economic trouble. Ayan, the United States also faced trouble when it comes to economy. So American had lost their privilege of selling their goods to Britain and its possession after winning its independence. So yun naman yung disadvantage ng uh, pagkakaroon nila ng full independence with Britain. Nawalan sila ng privilege na makapag-sell ng raw materials or goods in Britain. They still need to buy British manufactured goods. So by the late 1780s, American merchants were deeply in debt to Britain. So Spain, meanwhile, closed the Mississippi River to American trade in an attempt to limit American settlement along the river. Finally, in the Mediterranean, North African pirates interfered with American shipping and captured American seamen to sell as slaves. So, bumaliktad yung ginawa ng mga Dutch nung sila ay nag-deliver ng 20 African slaves in the Jamestown colony. So the Congress was unable to make the Mediterranean safe for the American ships. It was poor to bribe the pirates and too weak to fight them. Ayan, the government lacks authority at home pa din. Isa pa rin sa mga disadvantage. So lack of authority over individual states was the most severe problems faced by the Congress because it could not levy taxes, it asked the states to provide funds. So lacking the power to regulate commerce, Congress could not prevent trade wars that strained relationship among various states. So finally, the Confederation government was not organized to provide leadership or enforce its decision. So many Africans came to believe that the Articles of Confederation had to be revised, na kailangan ng mabago. Dahil sa sunod-sunod nga napalpak nitong confederation na ito. Ayan na nga. America's leaders decide to write a new constitution. In May 1787, 55 delegates assembled in Philadelphia to consider possible amendments to the Articles of Confederation. The delegates were practical men, farmers, merchants, lawyers, and bankers. Talagang makikita naman talaga natin na yung mga delegates ay yung talagang may kaya sa buhay. So the delegates decided to write an entirely new constitution. Working in a secret session through the summer of 1787, the delegates completed their work by September. So the constitution they presented to the people set up a federal system of government, one in which power would be shared between the central and the state government. Yun yung tinatawag nating federal system government. And ang government ay binubuo ng three branches. We have the executive, legislative, and the judicial. So ayan, in this letter written in 1787 on the eve of the Federal Constitution Convention, James Madison warns George Washington of the dangers from the both temporizers and radicals. Madison also sketches his plans for a new federal government and constitution to be formulated in Philadelphia, proportional representation, and a national legislative veto over state laws were just two of Madison's major proposal. So this is the real manuscripts. This is the real manuscripts of James Madison letter to George Washington. So the Constitution is ratified. So when we say ratified, it was signed, approved na. So before the new Constitution could take effect, it had to be approved by at least 9 of the states or yung tinatawag nating 13 colonies. Not even all the members of Philadelphia Convention agreed on the Constitution provisions. Many Americans thought that the Constitution gave too much power to the federal government. So these people called anti-federalists because they warned that the proposed federal government would dominate the states and deprive citizens of their rights or liberties. So those who favored naman sa Constitution ay tinatawag na federalists, campaign vigorously for its adoption. So many believe that the nation was in such a state of crisis that if the Constitution was or were not adopted, the United States would break up. Kung hindi sila magkakaroon ng new constitution, mananatiling mananatiling ang United States of America ay still on the crisis. Kaya kailangan nilang mag-adopt ng new constitution. Three leading Federalists, James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, and John Hay, published a series of brilliant essays explaining how the new constitution would remedy the defects of the Articles Confederation. So the essay calls the Federalists, along with the promise of a Bill of Rights, helped to win support for the new plan of government. So in June 1788, New Hampshire became the 9th state to ratify or vote its approval, thanks to New Hampshire. So by 1790, all 13 states had ratified the Constitution. The Bill of Rights is adopted. So the newly elected Congress met in 1789, and one of its first acts was to draw up 10 amendments to the Constitution. So these were the Bill of Rights, guaranteeing Americans freedom of religion, speech, assembly, and the press. Yan yung nakapaloob sa Bill of Rights. It also assured them of trial by jury, protection from cruel and unusual punishment, and other basic liberties. So the 10th amendments answer the fears of many Americans about federal power. Pag sinabi nating amendment, pagbabago. So it states that the power not given to the federal government by the Constitution were retained by the states or by the people. So ayan, these are the first 10 amendments to the Constitution make up the Bill of Rights. James Madison wrote the amendments, siya yung nagsulat, which lists specific prohibitions on governmental power in response to the calls from several states of greater constitutional protection for individual liberties. So American political freedom becomes a model for other nations. So with the ratification of Constitution and the adoption of the Bill of Rights, the success of American nation was assured. So the American had won their independence and equally important, they had created a lasting government of their own. So the founders of the nation constructed a government that has met the test of the time and upheld the high standard of individual liberty. Their success inspired people around the world to work toward the establishment of liberty in their own countries. At dyan na nga nag-e-end ang tatlong chapter outline ng chapter 19. But before that, meron tayong larawan dito. At ang nakikita nyo dito ay si Statue of Liberty. Si Statue of Liberty ay hindi lang siya representation of the United States of America, but it is a representations of the people from various nations. At makikita natin na ang bawat ah, body nitong si Statue of Liberty ay may sinisignify pala na symbols. First, we have the torch. So the statue's torch represent enlightenment and the idea that education can lead to the greater freedom and understanding. So education is a powerful weapon in changing the world, in making a great change in the world. The seven-pointed crown naman, it symbolizes the seven continental and the seven seas. Uh, the broken chains na nakikita sa kanyang baba, it symbolizes abolition of slavery and the ends of the oppressions. And the tablet, it inscribed with the date of July 4, 1776, the date of the American independence. So itong Statue of Liberty, enlightening the world, depicted a woman holding a torch in her raised right hand and a tablet in her left, upon which engraved July 4, 1776, the adoption date of the Declaration of Independence. So it's sa pagpapatayo ng Statue of Liberty, two countries ang nagtulungan, the France and the United States of America. So makikita mo pa rin talaga na napakatatag ang relasyon ng France with the United States of America. At talaga namang yung kanilang friendship ay mananatiling forever. At dito na nga nagtatapos ang aking presentation, and I hope that you gained a lot of learnings from this chapter, and the learnings that you have gained, you will be able to share this once once na magtuturo ka na sa iyong work. So yun lamang. Maraming salamat. Adios everyone.